Please be seated. You may continue.
Judge, I believe where we left off, we were going to publish states 192. And Officer Smith, as that is playing, is that a picture from the inside the Sallyport area at the police station?
Yes, it is.
Is that your patrol car pulling in?
Yes, it is.
And is that you that just got out of the driver's seat?
Yes, sir.
And was that an accurate depiction of your interaction with the defendant as he got out of the patrol car and walked into the station?
Yes, it was.
All right. And is that just you and the defendant walking through one of the interior doors?
Yes, sir.
And again, is that just you and the defendant walking through another portion of the police station?
Yes, sir.
All right. That's all we need for the lights. Thank you. All right. Did you take the defendant to an interview room?
Yes, sir.
And was anyone in the interview room when you placed the defendant in there?
No, sir.
Did you uncuff the defendant when you placed him in the interview room?
Yes, I did.
Did you offer him something to drink?
I did.
Did you stay in that room with the defendant?
No, sir.
Where did you go?
The room's monitored by one-way glass, so I went around to the other side of the glass.
All right. And were you able to see the defendant from the other side of the glass?
Yes, sir.
Did you watch the defendant until someone arrived
Yes,
to
sir.
speak with him?
Yes, sir.
And about how long was that?
30 to 40 minutes.
All right. At any time while you were watching the defendant for 30 to 40 minutes through the one-way glass, did he lose consciousness?
No, sir.
Did he appear to have any physical problems of any kind, falling out of the chair, anything like that?
No, sir.
Did he do anything that caused you concern about his health during that 30 to 40 minute period?
No, sir.
And who was it who arrived to interview the defendant?
I believe it was Investigator Singleton.
Did you participate in that interview?
No, sir, I did not.
And where were you when Detective Singleton was speaking with the defendant?
Back on the other side of the one-way glass.
All right. Could you hear what they were saying?
Not enough. You can hear people talking, but it's not enough to make out.
You can't make out what they're saying?
Correct.
All right. Thank you, sir. Judge, that's all I have.
Thank you, Cross.
Yes, I'm not.
Afternoon, officer. How you doing?
Good, how are you, sir?
Thanks for being here today. How long have you been an officer?
Since 2005,
Okay. And what was your training? What did you do to become an officer?
I attended the Law Enforcement Academy.
Okay. How long a course is that?
That's just shy of 700 hours.
In addition, have you taken any other courses like in community college or anything along the way or even before?
I have attended Seminole State College, yes.
That's just down the street?
Yes, sir.
What type of courses did you take?
It's general education courses.
Okay. Any focus on criminal justice, your chosen career?
Not at Seminole State, no, sir.
Okay. How long did you want to be a cop before you became one?
Since I was little.
Okay. Sort of a life goal for you then?
Yes, sir.
Why is that?
I enjoy helping and educating.
Okay. The traditional one, I guess it's not on all police cars, but it's on a lot of them, protect and serve.
Yes, sir.
Is that sort of a goal of yours then as a police officer?
Yes, sir.
Feel that's a pretty noble goal?
Yes, sir.
Do you enjoy it?
Yes, sir.
Can't enjoy it quite as much when you get a shots fired call, though, can you? It's got
No,
to be
sir.
a little concerning, right?
Yes, sir.
So you're on the radio, I think you testified about the map, and you get a call about a disturbance first, is that correct?
Suspicious person.
That's right. At some point it got upgraded, did it not,
Yes, sir, it
to
did.
shots fired?
Yes, sir.
What do you then do once you have a shots fired event?
You tend to wait for a little bit more additional information, but it becomes more of an officer safety issue.
At that point, you're officer safety, right?
Correct.
Okay. So you came in, did the circle, and actually, almost coincidentally, I guess, you were able to shine a light down that entire sort of alleyway towards where this event actually occurred, right?
Yes, sir.
And noticed at least one person towards the end?
Yes, sir.
Could you even tell who it was at that point?
No, sir.
So you pull up your car and then get out, and you take out, how do you equip yourself as you're going out of your car to go to that back alleyway?
Due to the lighting, I grabbed a flashlight.
Okay. I talked to another officer before you, and he said that his gun actually has a flashlight on it. Was that the way yours was set up, or
Yes, my gun does have a flashlight on it.
was that what you used? No.
No, sir, I used an actual
Okay.
standard flashlight.
So when you first came around that corner heading over towards the scene, did you know that was the scene where the shooting occurred?
No, sir, I did not.
Okay. So when you first came up on the scene, you had your flashlight out?
Yes, sir.
Had you taken out your service revolver yet?
Not at that point, no, sir.
Okay. Tell me what you first see when you come on scene.
I saw Mr. Zimmerman standing on the sidewalk. There may have been somebody out there with him, and I saw Trayvon laying in the grass.
Okay. And when you say sidewalk, there was a walkway that you sort of came down from your car, correct?
Correct. The sidewalk makes a T.
There's a T intersection.
Right.
As you came around that corner, can you sort of orient us to where near the T or how far down that T Mr. Zimmerman was?
If you came around the side of the building to the top of the T, it was approximately 30 feet.
30 feet from the T intersection?
Correct.
Okay. Very close by to where Trayvon Martin's body was, right?
Yes, sir.
Within feet?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was he doing?
Who?
Mr. Zimmerman.
He was standing on the sidewalk.
Okay. Did he look towards you as you were coming towards him?
Yes.
Do you remember at that point whether or not there was anybody else present?
There may have been, but I'm not 100% certain.
Okay. And flashlight on Mr. Zimmerman at that point?
Yes, sir.
And could you tell he was wearing the clothes that we've talked about, the orange or red jacket?
Yes, sir.
At that point, could you see the injuries to his nose when you first had the flashlight on him?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And were they similar as to the picture that we've seen a little while ago?
Yes, sir.
Even more, with the actual bleeding at that point, wasn't it?
That's correct.
Okay. And his eyes were watered?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Both eyes, correct?
Yes, sir.
And what did you first say to him?
I asked him if he had seen what happened.
And his response?
Yes.
Did that seem like an appropriate response? Anything wrong with the way he answered you?
No, sir.
Next, what did you ask him?
If he had seen, if the young man had been shot, and if he had seen who shot him.
And how did he respond?
That he did, and that he was still armed.
Okay. At that point, what's your response to find out that somebody involved in a shooting is right there in front of you, armed?
At that point is when I unholstered my service weapon.
And take it out?
Correct.
That's protocol, is it not?
Correct.
Again, it's officer safety is your number one
Right.
charge, because without that, you can't do anything else.
Correct.
Can't help anyone else.
Correct.
Okay. Pointed at him?
Yes, sir.
And again, that's appropriate, correct?
Yes, sir.
You did not point it at him because of any immediate threat that he posed to you, correct? He didn't challenge you in any way, did he?
No, sir.
Matter of fact, he was completely cooperative, was he not?
Yes, sir.
But protocol is you arm yourself and make sure that you have it on him to take care of the situation.
Yes, sir.
And what did you next ask him?
As he was telling me that he had shot him and he was still armed, was when he kind of leaned over to expose the firearm.
So if I were to do that then for just a moment, tell me, I could have you do it, I'm going to try, but the gun was on his right hip, I think you testified?
Correct.
So this jacket is longer than the one he was wearing, right?
Yes, sir.
But if we flipped it up sort of a silly way, he went like this,
Yes, sir.
and just by this movement was able to do enough.
The hands going up and the leaning over.
Oh, okay, so sort of like that?
Right.
And in just doing that movement, that was enough of a movement where the gun was exposed, correct?
Correct.
The jacket didn't cover the gun by more than a few inches, right?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So any movement up of the jacket, even that small movement that he did by leaning over, exposed the gun, right?
Correct.
And had the jacket been ridden up in any form or fashion, the gun would have been exposed, right?
I would imagine so, yes.
So, do you remember if he had a cell phone in his hand or not?
I don't recall.
Okay. In any case, he showed you his gun, kept his hands in the air, didn't he?
Correct.
That's what you told him to do?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you do at that point now that you have a flashlight, a gun, and you see another gun?
I asked Mr. Zimmerman to put his hands on top of his head, interlock his fingers,
Okay.
at which point I reholstered, made contact, hands-on contact with Mr. Zimmerman and placed him in handcuffs.
Okay. You leave the gun until you get his hands secured?
Yes, sir.
And that's protocol as well?
That's choice.
Okay. He didn't resist in any way, did he?
No, sir.
And I guess that not resisting is you have him like this, interlocked, correct?
Correct.
Then you would either turn him around or go behind him?
To handcuff him?
Yeah,
I was behind him.
right. Take one arm, get it back, take
Correct.
the other arm. You've, of course, been in, I would imagine, hundreds of situations having to handcuff people, correct?
Yes, sir.
And most people, I'll let you answer it. What percentage of people at least offer some resistance to you when you're trying to get their arms behind their back?
Object to the relevance of anyone else.
Have you had other people resist getting their arms behind the back?
Same objection, Your Honor, relevance.
At this point, I don't want to speak to you.
Well, then
Respond.
please approach.
I'll rephrase it.
Okay.
Let me rephrase it. Did Mr. Zimmerman offer any response whatsoever to your cuffing him behind his back?
Any response of resistance?
Yeah, did he respond? Did he resist at all? If I
No.
said response, I apologize. Did
No.
he resist at all?
No, sir.
Complied with that command of yours immediately
Yes, sir.
and completely?
Yes, sir.
Once you had him secured, then you were able to secure his firearm?
Yes, sir.
And I think a point was made that at that point, your focus, even more so than other people involved, is to secure the firearm, correct?
Correct.
And though in a perfect world you might have been able to put on gloves, you didn't have the time then, you just grabbed the gun And I think you said you put it between one of your clips and your vest?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that was necessitated by the circumstances, wasn't it?
That is correct.
That was, again, primary goal number one at that point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. At that point, as your first contact to Mr. Zimmerman, did he seem angry?
No, sir.
Did he seem frustrated?
No, sir.
Did he seem spiteful of anything that was going on?
No, sir.
Any ill will or hatred at all that you saw him exude as you first saw him literally moments after the event?
No, sir.
Any concern about him at all except for his injuries?
No, sir.
Even though he had that obvious injury to his nose, did you see the injuries to the back of his head yet?
While I was securing him, yes, I was able to see
So
that.
as you got behind him, you could see the blood dripping down the back of his head?
Correct.
So even with those injuries, did he seem agitated?
No, sir.
There has been testimony that he was seemingly calm. Did he come across that way to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Having just gone through what he went through, and now that you know, having just shot somebody, did his behavior to you just seem strange?
No, sir.
Just usual?
I wouldn't say usual.
Okay. Not, well, was it particularly unusual,
No, sir.
even for those circumstances?
No, sir.
You didn't think that didn't come across to you as being cavalier, did he?
No, sir.
Or just uncaring?
No, sir.
Fairly appropriate for what you now know he had just gone through?
Correct.
So, you secure the gun,
Yes, sir.
and then what's the next thing that you do?
I had Mr. Zimmerman have a seat in the rear of my patrol car.
Okay. Let's talk about sort of the walk over. My understanding, again from other testimony, is that another officer came on scene fairly quickly behind you. Do you recall that?
That's correct.
Do you recall who it was?
Officer Ayala.
Ayala? And you had control of Mr. Zimmerman, and that became your now task, correct?
Correct.
And was it true that Officer Ayala took over the situation of dealing with the other person, now known as Mr. Martin?
That is correct.
Okay. And as you were going, anything else that you recall Mrs. Zimmerman saying to you at the scene before you started walking towards the car?
Not before, no, sir.
Okay. As you were walking towards the car, didn't he utter something to you, sort of voluntarily?
Yes, sir.
And what did he say?
He stated to me that he was yelling for help and that nobody would come help him.
And how long after you first saw him did that happen? Within a minute?
It was a few minutes.
Okay. As long as it took to do what we just talked about?
Correct.
And then, because as soon as you had him cuffed, you secured the gun, all right? Turned him around and walked him towards your car.
Correct.
The car was 30 yards away?
Approximately.
And it was during that walk, actually almost immediately upon walking towards the car, that he uttered that to you, right?
It wasn't very long after, no, sir.
He actually said that to you twice, didn't he?
Correct.
Second time was after you got to the car?
That's correct.
Tell me how he said that. Was it as... tell me how he said that.
It was almost confusion.
Well, tell me.
That's basically what it was. Sort of a confused look on his face.
Like he didn't know why, after screaming for help, nobody would come help him?
Correct.
Object to that is calling for speculation.
I'll rephrase it, Your Honor.
Thank you.
It came across to you as though he was confused?
That's correct.
You had testified a little while ago about Mr. Zimmerman's condition. We've talked about his injuries, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then you also said that the back, particularly the back of his jacket, was wet.
Yes, sir.
Of course, it was raining on and off that evening, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Was the back noticeably more wet than the rest of his body?
Yes, sir.
As though he had been laying in grass on his back?
That's correct.
And he actually also had pieces of grass on his back as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell with blue jeans that the back of his blue jeans were wet as well, or could
It
you?
appeared to be a little bit darker.
A little bit darker than the front?
Correct.
Evidencing to you what in the darkness?
That he had been laying on his back.
And that his jeans were wet as well on the back?
Correct.
So you get him to the car, which my understanding is that you stayed with him the entire time?
I did.
Again, that's your charge at that point, correct?
Correct.
So you were there when the medical personnel came and treated him?
I was.
Did he say anything, well, did he say anything about the facts of the case to the medical personnel?
No, sir.
When you first arrested him, when you first detained him, did he ask for a lawyer?
No, sir.
As far as you know, all the time that you were with him, did he ever ask for a lawyer?
No, sir.
So you have him in the car, medical personnel sort of deal with him and finish with him, correct?
Correct.
Were you waiting for them to finish so that you could continue on with what you had to do, which at that point became transporting him?
Correct.
Okay. So that was mainly your reason for waiting around. Let them finish and then continue on?
Yeah, I have to wait if they decide if they're going to transport or not.
And how was that decision accomplished?
Through the paramedics.
And do you know, were you there or listening?
I could overhear bits and pieces. I was
Okay.
kind of pushed back because there was a crowd around the doorway of the car.
Including the paramedics?
It was a crowd of paramedics.
Gotcha. Mrs. Zimmerman still in the backseat of your car
Correct.
with his legs out on the ground,
That's correct.
and then the paramedics attending to him.
Correct.
Do you know which one made the decision to transport or not?
Which paramedic? I do not.
Okay. But it seems that the decision to release him back to you was what was done.
Yes.
Correct? Did you have any impact on that? Like, I want to get him to the station. Are we done here? What's going on?
No, sir.
Okay, left that in their hands.
Yes, sir.
So he's then released to you
Correct.
and put him in the back seat of the car. At some point, did you actually have to help him get up out of the car for the rest of the examination where you sort of lifted him up? He was still, I'm sorry, let me start. He was still cuffed in the back seat of the car, correct?
Correct.
And as he was being treated by medical personnel, you still had to have him cuffed.
He was still handcuffed, yes.
At that point, all you know is that he's acknowledged having shot somebody.
Correct.
And you're not going to release somebody under those circumstances just yet.
Correct.
Okay. So when the medical personnel wanted him lifted up to check the rest of him, did you help lift him up?
No, sir.
Do you know if another officer did?
I don't recall.
Do you know how it happened with the medical personnel? If you
It
were
may have
watching?
been two of the paramedics lifted him up.
Okay. Do you remember that happening?
I remember him standing up, but I don't remember who.
Okay.
It wasn't me.
Anyway, that's finished. He's now in the backseat of the car, still cuffed,
Correct.
and you're taking him back towards Sanford Police Department.
That's correct.
And tell me again of the conversation about feeling lightheaded.
He said that he felt lightheaded, had a headache while he was in the backseat of the patrol car.
Did that seem to be consistent with his injuries to you?
Yes, sir.
And did you then call over to Sanford Police Department to figure out what to do with him now that he might have to go to the hospital?
I had called the supervisor that was on scene,
All right. Do you recall who that was?
Sergeant McCoy.
And tell me of the conversation with Sergeant McCoy.
I explained to her the comment that he had made about feeling lightheaded. She advised me if he wants to go to the hospital, we'll transport him to the hospital. If not, we'll take him to the station.
Okay. Did you have a discussion with Mr. Zimmerman that though you could transport him to the hospital, the expenses of that would be on his shoulders.
That I don't recall that, no, sir.
They would, in fact, though, you would not, SPD doesn't cover expenses if he goes to the hospital, right?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And then we've learned, we've seen the pictures, I'm not going to put them back up right now, but there was one picture after Mrs. Zimmerman had been cleaned up, correct?
Correct.
Those pictures were taken after midnight that night, were they not?
I don't know what time they were taken, but it was after.
After the initial interview with Detective Singleton?
Correct.
Do you know who cleaned him up at SPD?
While at the station, he was given a bottle of water and some tissues.
Oh, to sort of clean himself off?
Correct.
Okay. And is that then how it went from the first picture we saw, the one with him with the blood all over him, to the one where the blood is gone?
He was cleaned up some by the fire department on scene, and then while he was at the station.
Okay. Was there ever a time at Sanford Police Department where there was any other videotaping of him that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of, no, sir.
Was there ever a time where he needed any physical assistance from you or whatever in helping, leaning against a wall or doing anything like that?
No, sir.
And you watched him for about 30, I think you said, 30 or 40 minutes before the investigator came in to talk to him, right?
Correct.
Question him about what had happened?
Yes, sir.
And did you say that you watched that interrogation or interview?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was he cooperative?
He appeared to be so.
Okay. Did he ever ask for a lawyer during that event?
I don't know.
Had he asked for one, the interview would have stopped, correct?
Yes, sir.
I might just have a moment, Your Honor. Thanks very much for the time. Your Honor, no further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Just briefly, thank you, Judge.
You may proceed.
Officer Smith, you were asked if when you came into contact with the defendant, he seemed to be angry or frustrated, and you said that he did not.
Correct.
Do you know what was going on in his head when he pulled the trigger for the bullet that killed Trayvon Martin?
Let me interrupt with an objection. I think that's going to be speculation, and I would object to that, Your
Okay,
Honor.
sustained is the speculation.
Do you know what he was thinking before you arrived?
Your Honor,
Well, that's a yes or
similarly,
no. That would, if the answer is yes, it calls for speculation.
if the answer is no, I would suggest it's not relevant.
Okay, sustained.
You were asked about whether or not his firearm was visible when he exposed it to you like this,
Yes.
and you had a flashlight on him.
Yes, sir.
Do you know if his firearm was visible when he was out at the location where Trayvon Martin's body was in that lighting?
That I don't know.
You said at the station you offered the defendant some tissues, like Kleenex,
Yes, sir.
to clean himself.
Yes, sir.
Did anybody else clean him at the station?
Not that I saw.
Judge, I'd like to publish one more photograph, if I could. Officer Smith, I'm showing you States 46. Is that a fair and accurate depiction of the way the defendant appeared when he was at the police station after he had been cleaned up?
Yes, sir.
All right, and that was taken on the evening of the 26th, or perhaps just after midnight into the 27th?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. Judge, that's all I have.
A very brief follow-up. I think it was just a mistake, but I want to clear it up. Mr. Guy, when he suggested his maneuvering for the picture, actually lifted up his left arm. You had testified, however, pretty certainly that the gun was on his right side, correct?
Correct.
And that he lifted up his right arm.
Correct.
So you have no question in your mind whatsoever, do you, that the gun was located on his right hip?
No, I don't.
Okay. Mr. Guy's putting it up his left arm was just a mistake as far as you can tell?
Correct.
Thanks, nothing further.
And any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, may Officer Smith be excused?
He may.
Thank you very much, you're excused. Call your next witness, please.
Sir, we call Lindsay Folgate.
Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony presented will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you.
Okay, we'll get you a pad of paper. Just one, or? You may proceed.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Could you state your name for the record, please?
Yes, Lindsay Folgate.
And could you spell both names?
Yes, LINDZEEFOLGATE.
What is your occupation?
I'm a physician assistant
And where are you employed?
at Altamont Family Practice.
Is that located in Altamont Springs, Seminole County, Florida?
Correct.
Can you briefly tell us about your education and training regarding your occupation, ma'am?
Certainly. I am a physician assistant, meaning
I'm sorry, we've had problems with that microphone. You need to lean up a little bit and you may need to
Certainly.
adjust it.
I'm a physician assistant. I underwent 4 years of an undergraduate degree in a bachelor's of health science, and then subsequent to that, I did 2 years at a master's of physician assistant studies program at the University of Florida.
And you mentioned you obtained your master's when, ma'am?
I obtained my master's from June of 2006 to June of 2008.
And your master's was in physician's assistant studies?
Correct.
Are you certified by the state of Florida?
Correct. Yes, I am.
Please explain what you do and how it is different from a nurse and a doctor.
Okay. We can start with the nurse first. As a physician assistant, again, I have my master's degree, which is a different level of training than a nurse. I am taught on a medical model in the physician assistant program, and the purpose after my schooling is to go out and to be able to have direct patient contact with patients and be able to diagnose and treat their illnesses. So that's a little bit different than what a nurse can do.
Okay. And how about a doctor? How are you different than a doctor?
As a physician goes, as a physician, you have 4 years of a medical school degree, and then you go on to do a residency. So we're trained on a similar model, although ours is scaled down to a 2-year program, where for the first year I'm in a didactic school year, which is mainly a group of studies, and then the second year is our clinical year, where we do different basic rotations.
And are you able to do everything that a doctor does except what?
I'm able to do most things that a physician can do, except in the state of Florida, I cannot sign off solely by myself on controlled substances.
Okay. And do you have your own patients?
I do.
Okay. How long have you been a physician assistant at Altamont Family Practice?
From April of 2011 to the present time.
Can you tell us how Altamont Family Practice is set up? I'm assuming if you're a patient, you come in, what are the processes that a patient coming in would be treated?
From the beginning, you would like that?
Yeah, just very briefly.
Okay. Briefly, if you were a patient to come into our office, you would enter through the doors, you would greet our front desk staff. They would obtain your insurance and license information. They would give you the paperwork if it had not already been filled out as a new patient. Once that is received, the insurance is verified, then the chart gets put up to be taken back. The medical assistant would come and get the chart. They would take the patient back. They would do vital signs, and then they would get a basic note of why they were being seen in the office that day.
And at that point, then, would you become involved if that's your patient in treating or assessing the injuries or whatever was wrong with the patient?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have a patient by the name of George Zimmerman? Was he a patient of yours at Altamont Family Practice?
He was.
And do you see that person in the courtroom today, ma'am?
I do.
Okay. Is that the person just stood up?
That is.
Right.
Yes.
The record reflect the witness has identified defendant George Zimmerman.
The record will so reflect.
Ms. Falgate, your first contact with the defendant George Zimmerman, was that on August the 19th of 2011?
Correct.
And in terms of dealing with him the first time, was a history obtained from the defendant, Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
Okay. And do you review and personally go over the information that, in this case, Mr. Zimmerman provided to you or to your assistant in making sure that you are documenting everything you need to in order to treat him?
Yes.
Okay. In order to get what medication and what other possible benefit you can provide in assisting him in whatever he has a problem with?
Correct.
Okay. What I want to do is introduce at this time State's Exhibit, make sure I get the right one. State's Exhibit 195, which is the August 19, 2011. If I may approach the witness.
Yes. Pick up a matter outside your presence, so if you'll please put your notepads face down and follow Corporal Lapp back to the jury room. Is this a copy? Out to the witness room for just a moment. Okay, and right now we're discussing State's Exhibit 195, and the objection is to relevance of certain portions.
Yes, Your Honor. I might, if I might suggest, I think that this witness can certainly testify to what she remembers, and she can even use medical records to refresh her recollection. My concern is the idea or the contention that the medical records themselves should be admitted. I think that her testimony, to the extent this court perceives it to be relevant, should be admitted, but not the medical records. And if in fact the medical records are going to be allowed, that they would need to be redacted much more severely than they are. I think this court redacted them for discovery purposes initially, but other matters would now need to be further redacted. And the only thing I think that would not be redacted, not to argue the state's case, is that which documents the injuries. And there were some other previous records that talk about some exercising, and I understand the state's position on that. The court can make its own ruling, but short of that, I don't think that any other words or comments, history, would be relevant nor admissible.
I guess we'll take it one at a time, Your Honor, as to the exhibit before you, which I believe is State's Exhibit 195. It's dealing with the August 19, 2011 treatment of this defendant. This would establish, I guess, if I'm to, through the court, asking Mr. O'Mara, he has stated he has no objection to the witness testifying about such matters, but does not want the record itself in, if I understood correctly.
I believe the witness can testify to relevant matters, and I think if we were to look at this first page, I think there's a sentence or two that can be arguably relevant. But everything else, I would argue, as a medical record, quite protected under our statutes, would not be admissible unless there's particular relevance. I could just,
I'll be glad.
You can read as quickly as I can, Your Honor. There are just things in there that are not relevant to this case. And there are two sentences, I think, beginning with started to exercise.
why don't we come up to the bench and we can go over these page by page. Ready for the jury?
Yes, sir.
Let's go ahead and bring the jury in. Please be seated. You may continue, Mr. De Leon.
I may proceed, Your Honor. Ms. Folgate, I think we left off with you having Mr. Zimmerman, the defendant, as a prior patient, as a patient back, and your first contact with him would have been August the 19th, 2011, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And as part of your contact with the defendant that day, you obtained a history from the defendant, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And when you obtained a history, you actually spoke to him yourself?
Correct. They come in with a pre-filled out history that they bring with them, so we have some sort of idea of what their history may be, and then we take the rest of it.
All right. I'm going to show you, ma'am, what's been marked, actually introducing the evidence of State's Exhibit 195. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
And do you recognize that exhibit as part of the medical records that are kept at your family practice, Altamont Family Practice?
Yes.
Okay. I've highlighted certain parts that I want to ask you specifically about, so if you can just make reference to those.
Okay.
That record would indicate that he was a patient of yours, and it's got his name, George M. Zimmerman, 27 years old, male, race, white. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it would also have the encounter date, which would have been August 19, 2011 at 1:29 p.m.?
Correct.
Okay. In terms of the highlighted parts only, can you read the first part, the first sentence of the highlighted part?
Of the history of present illness?
Yeah, just the highlighted part only.
Seen in the office to establish care, referred through insurance provider.
In that same paragraph, it also has a highlighted part towards the bottom of that paragraph. Do you see that?
Yes. Difficulty with falling and maintaining sleep. Started to exercise intensely with MMA, but this has not helped.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last sentence? Started to...
Correct. Difficulty with falling and maintaining sleep. Started to exercise intensely with MMA, but this has not helped.
And were you able to determine MMA as being mixed martial arts?
Yes.
On the notes, I believe there are two sentences that are highlighted. Is that correct, in yellow?
Yes.
And could you read those two sentences?
Patient here to establish care. Patient was referred by his insurance list of providers.
Ma'am, I'm going to now provide to you, if I could, with the court's permission, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
You saw him subsequent to that, and I want to refer specifically to a date, which is September 23rd of 2012. And I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 196.
Okay, so 2012, that's 2011.
I apologize, 2011. Thank you, Your Honor. Do you see that exhibit before you, ma'am?
I do.
Your treatment, I'm sorry, you would have had the contact with the defendant again, George Zimmerman, on that day?
Correct.
And when you say contact, you yourself actually had contact with the defendant?
Yes.
Okay. On that day also, when you saw him, you gathered, just, it's got that exhibit's got the regular information, George M. Zimmerman, 27 years old, male, white, and the date, September 23rd, 2011 at 1:52 p.m., is that correct?
Correct.
And I believe there's a highlighted part in that page where you've got, in terms of social history, exercise, is that correct?
Correct.
And what did you notate there in terms of social history exercises to the defendant, George Zimmerman?
That he was involved in mixed martial arts 3 days per week.
Primary person witness, Your Honor.
Disagree.
Let me get that document back from you if I could, and let me show you State's Exhibit 194. You would have seen him on I guess on that date when you treated him, did you, history was obtained in terms of what he was there for?
Yes.
Right, Persian complaints of an earache or whatever, would that have been the same?
It would have, it would have been noted on the notes, and then yes, we would have discussed what
Okay.
the concerns that he had.
Okay, so the history that would have been taken, would that have been first by a medical assistant, so you would have an idea of when you talked to him, what he was there for?
Exactly.
Okay. And if you could, let's go over in terms of the way you would have dealt with him in terms of, I know you've got records and they may not be in exact order in the way you treated him, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, because this exhibit is a printout of the combined records.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So if we could, let's start at the very beginning. Your first contact with him, what did you deal with in terms of what you dealt with and what he said he didn't say?
On this exact visit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
On February the 27th of 2012 at 11:02 a.m.
So what would have happened initially is the patient would have been brought back to the room and had vitals done, and then a brief history would have been taken by the medical assistant. I then will review that brief history so I have an idea of exactly what I'm going in to see. And then while I enter the room, then we discuss his certain complaints that he was there for.
So I guess as is done, I'm assuming every time somebody goes to the doctor, vital signs would have been taken first?
Yes.
Okay. And then the next part would have been his patient is here for whatever, and patient states something, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And if you could, I think that's on page 2 of those records. Patient is here for what? Go ahead and tell us.
Patient is here for a return note for work. Patient was in fight on 2/26/2012. Patient was punched in nose and has 2 lacerations in the back of head. 911 was called and EMT said patient's nose was broken.
I gather when we're talking about right here, notes, this is what Mr. Zimmerman is telling the medical assistant?
Correct.
Okay. So he's telling the medical assistant that he's there for a return note for work,
Correct.
that he was in a fight on February the 26th of 2012, that he was punched in the nose and has 2 lacerations in the back of the head, that 911 was called, and an EMT said his nose was broken.
Correct.
Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And then you would have reviewed that and then actually had contact with Mr. Zimmerman?
Correct.
Okay. So I think we now go to I've got it as a front page, I don't know if that's correct. Would that be history of present illness?
That is where I would begin.
Okay,
Yes.
so you actually would have had contact with him at that time?
Correct.
And I gather you talked to him, he tells you what his ailment is, and then you would have treated it?
Correct.
Okay. So if you could, tell us at that time when you're talking to him, what he tells you.
When we are talking during that time, basically what I've written in the note is what he is telling me. And that states to say that during the altercation, he had a weapon, that he was authorized to carry a firearm, and he fired at the attacker, killing him. He goes on to mention that he was evaluated by EMS at the scene, and he states his lacerations were cleaned during that time. He was told that he had a broken nose and denies being taken to the hospital. He then returned to work and was told he needed a police report and medical clearance to return to work. And then I go into my review of systems and asking him certain questions that he would confirm or deny.
So you first get his statement as to what happened or why he's there.
Correct.
Okay. And I think the first part is he states today he's complaining of nasal pain.
Correct.
Okay, nasal pain would be his nose?
Correct.
Okay. And then he tells you the history, and then you then diagnose. What do? You go over all the parts of his body, or what do you do?
After we discuss the history, I ask certain questions which we clarify as our review of systems, which would be on the following page.
Okay.
Once we go over the review of systems, I'm basically asking him to confirm or deny certain symptoms that he may be having at the time. And then I move on to the physical examination, which is where I determine what injuries were noted, and then based off of that, what would need to be treated.
All right, so let's go back a second and then talk about review of symptoms. Go ahead and cover those, please.
Okay. So during the history of present illness, I again asked him if he was having any headaches, change in visual acuity, slurred speech, dizziness, or gait abnormality. And then I also asked him, was he having any nausea or vomiting, and then in associated with that, any abdominal pain. I then go through and look at the review of systems, as well as this is a drop-down box menu in our electronic medical record system, and review any other symptoms that may have been involved.
All right, so let's take those one by one.
Okay.
He in terms of you asking him, he denied HA. What does HA mean?
HA means headache.
Okay, so he denies having any headache.
Correct.
Change in VA, what does that mean?
VA means visual acuity, so no
Right.
change in vision.
He denies any slurred speech. What does that mean?
That would mean exactly what it says, but any slurred speech, and sometimes I'll rephrase that to patients as, are you talking any more abnormal than what you would have normally?
He denies dizziness. That's an obvious one, but let's make sure for the record what that means.
Clarifying to see if he had any dizziness, meaning he felt off balance for any reason.
And gait abnormality, meaning he's able to walk fine, no problems walking.
Exactly, and sometimes I'll clarify that on layman's terms, meaning are you walking as if you were drunk or staggering?
Okay. Then I notate on the history of present illness, he admits to occasional nausea when thinking about the violence last night, but denies abdominal pain. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
He was telling me that when he was reflecting on what happened that night, that he was having some nauseous feelings, and I would then further ask, are you having abdominal pain, to clarify whether the nausea was coming from an abdominal pain symptom or from a psychological factor.
And what was your determination as to that?
That it was not from his abdominal system, that it was more from a psychological factor.
He also, you notated complaints of left SI joint tenderness since the event. Go ahead and tell us what that means.
The SI joint is the sacroiliac joint, and he has mentioned that he was having some tenderness on the left side since the altercation that night.
And you also notate he denies numbness or tingling or incontinence. Tell us about that.
These are follow-up questions I would ask on anyone who would complain of back pain or SI joint tenderness, to make sure that there was nothing more severe going on. So was he having any numbness or tingling into his extremities, or was he having any bowel or bladder incontinence?
Then when you do the drop down on your computer, I guess when you say drop down, or you're going through in terms of constitutional symptoms, right? He denies fevers or chills.
Correct.
His eyes, he doesn't have blurred vision or...
Diplopia means double vision.
Okay. Ears, nose, mouth, and throat. Tell us about that.
He admits to nose pain, but has no hearing loss or tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears.
Why is what's the significance of that? Tell us about that. What are you looking for?
The significance of the tinnitus?
Yeah.
Just making sure with the trauma that he is telling me he sustained, would there be any significant side effects from that, and that one of the results could be hearing loss or ringing in the ears.
So he has no ringing in the ears or hearing loss?
No complaints of that.
I'm sorry, no complaints of that. And that's all you can go on that time, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. But you've got in here admits nose pain, and I think we're going to get to this in a little while.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Cardiovascular, tell us about that.
He denies palpitations, meaning any abnormal or irregular heartbeats, and he denies any chest pain or chest pressure.
Respiratory?
Respiratory denies any shortness of breath.
Okay. Tell us about the next few other ones.
The gastrointestinal denies abdominal pain, nausea, and or vomiting related to the gastrointestinal system.
Okay.
The integumentary, that's the skin, so I put in there admits scalp lacerations because that is one of his concerns. Neurological will be next. Admits to head trauma, as he's telling me that he sustained a head trauma that night based on the story that he's telling me, but denies tingling, numbness, weakness, headache, dizziness, speech difficulty, gait disturbance, or loss of consciousness. And then the last part would be psychiatric. He admits to stress surrounding the event, but denies suicidal thoughts or attempts.
Go back to neurological, in terms of admits head trauma. Why are you concerned about whether he has difficulty with speech, or he's got headaches, or whether he's lost consciousness? What's the significance of that?
The significance of those review of systems or symptoms would be more concerning or lead me to down another line of questioning, and that would further potentiate this certain treatment that I would elicit.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. So you have no concerns in terms of, he says he's not losing consciousness, he's able to write, able to function fine. He has no problem in terms of concentration or weakness or headaches or anything like that?
Correct.
Okay. If he had complained of those, what steps would you have taken in treating those, if those existed?
It would also be based off my physical exam, so I would take those symptoms into consideration while I'm doing the physical exam, and pending some of those were apparent, and you would rank those on certain severity, then you would proceed with possible imaging, meaning a picture of the brain.
So at this point, you had no concern about, I know we're going to get to the physical, but based on just this, you have no concern regarding that at this point?
Based on what he's telling me, there is less concern, correct.
Okay. All right, I guess we then, am I skipping a step, or are you going now to physical exam?
I would go next to the physical exam.
Okay, if you could just cover that, please, thank you.
No problem. So the first part of the physical exam would be his general appearance. It says he's in no acute distress. Most of the time that means, is he any physical shortness of breath or significant pain at the time? He is obese, and that's based off his body mass index, which takes into account his height and weight.
Let me interrupt you, I apologize. Is his height and weight anywhere on here?
His height and weight would be on the first page.
Okay, I neglected to ask you about that, sorry.
In the vital signs, saying he's 5 foot 7.5 inches and weighs 204 pounds.
5'7" and how much?
7.5, 7.5.
Okay, and then what else, what was his weight?
204 pounds.
Okay, I apologize, I interrupted you.
No problem.
You stated also he is obese, and is that you based on what now?
That's based off his body mass index, which takes into account your height and weight. A BMI greater than 31 falls into a category of obesity.
What's the next sentence you've got there under general appearance?
He is alert and oriented and appears his stated age.
Anything significant with that?
I would take that into account given the history of the head trauma to make sure that he's alert and is understanding the questions that I'm asking him.
Okay. Go ahead.
Next would be head. He's normocephalic, atraumatic. The face is symmetric. 2 scalp lacerations to the occiput, which is the back part of the head, approximately 2 centimeters and 0.5 centimeters, respectively.
Okay. Tell me the significance of that.
The significance of the measurement itself?
Yes, yeah. Tell me the measurements, and in terms of, you use some big words there. Tell me what you mean by those big words there.
Okay. The significant would be 2 lacerations, meaning 2 cuts to the back of his head. And the occiput, again, is the back part of the head. I measure them, given his concerns and his complaints, to have that documented to make sure that we know, should these not heal appropriately, these were the original size that he came in to be seen for.
And you said 2 centimeters and a 0.5 centimeters. What
Correct.
is that in inches, I guess? Or can you estimate using your finger, I guess, or using your, how small are they?
Okay, 2 centimeters would approximately be about this big, and then 0.5 is much smaller.
Okay. And based on your observations and review of those lacerations, did you feel there was anything additional that needed to be done regarding those? Like any kind of stitches or anything like that?
That determination is based on how well the skin edges are what we call approximated, which means how well are they together to begin with, and how deep is the laceration itself. Based off of the approximation of the skin margins and the depth of the lacerations, I did not feel that sutures were necessary.
And a laceration, tell us what that means when you say a laceration versus a cut or something like that.
A laceration is basically a more proper term for a cut.
Okay. And you said it wasn't deep enough to require, in your opinion, any stitches or anything. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you said the skin edges were approximated well, if I've got that right?
Correct.
Okay. Tell me about the eyes.
eyes, it says PERRLA, which means pupils are equal, round, and reactive to light, and the extraocular movements are intact. So I'm checking his pupils to make sure they're responding to light appropriately, and then we check the extraocular movements, meaning how well are his eyes moving in each direction, and that was normal. And then it says conjunctiva and sclera are clear. The conjunctiva and sclera are, for lack of better words, the white parts of your eyes, so making sure that there's no injection into that part. But I did note that he had bilateral black eyes.
And what does that mean to you?
That would mean skin discoloration to the inferior orbit, meaning the bottom portion of the eyes.
Okay. Going back to the head, to, I guess, the skull, the scalp, whatever, you noticed those lacerations. Did you notice any other trauma to the head at all?
I did not at the time. I don't recall.
Let's talk about the ears, nose, mouth, and throat.
Bruising noted to the nasolabial folds bilateral with swelling. The nasolabial folds would be the folds between the nose and the mouth. And there was some swelling noted there and some bruising, so darkening of the skin. No evidence of septal deviation on visual inspection, meaning the septum, which is the center part of your nose, appeared to be straight and in alignment. No bleeding noted in the nares, which means there was no blood in the nose itself. No hemotympanum to the bilateral ears, which means there's no blood behind the eardrums. And no evidence of tonsillar stones, which was a complaint that he had outside of the current reason that he was there.
So let's talk about the nose itself. No evidence of septal deviation. What does that mean?
So septal deviation again would mean, is the alignment of the nose correct?
So his nose is straight, in other words.
Correct.
It is not crooked or in any way damaged to that extent.
Not on visual inspection, no.
Okay. I think you've already covered the chest and his heart, etc. Everything else seemed normal.
Correct.
You talked about the tender left SI, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about that again.
The SI again is the sacroiliac joint, which is the space located, for lack of a better word, in the center of your buttocks.
I think you gave him some medicine for the complaint he had, is that correct?
For the SI joint pain, correct.
Yes. And what did you give him?
We gave him Lodine, which is an anti-inflammatory.
Okay. By the way, when you saw him regarding those lacerations, did he have any Band-Aids or anything covering them?
He did have one large Band-Aid covering them.
Okay, and I'm assuming, or maybe it's an assumption on my part, did you remove the Band-Aid to look at him?
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned that he said, that is, Mr. Zimmerman told you that the EMT had told you that the nose was either broken or possibly broken, is that correct?
That was what I was told, correct.
Okay. Based on your examination of his nose, can you say that his nose was broken?
I would say likely broken. It's hard to say definitively based off of the fact that there were no x-rays to show the break itself. However, most of the time, a broken nose can be made clinically as well, and that's based off of the black eyes that we saw, the nasolabial swelling, the bruising.
So you can say it is or it isn't, or you don't know, or?
I couldn't say definitively one way or the other because I have no direct x-ray saying this is exactly where the fracture occurs. But clinically appearing, it appeared to be, yes.
Okay, all right. But it was still perfectly straight?
It was still straight. There was no septal deviation.
I think you've got, in terms of the plan, decision-making progress, is that what you would move on to next?
After the physical exam, yes, I would move to the plan and the decision-making process.
You talked about the scalp lacerations, that there was no sutures needed. In other words, you didn't need any sewing up at all, right?
No stitches, correct.
Okay. And you stated in terms of broken nose that we discussed it as likely broken, but does not appear to have septal deviation. Swelling and black eyes are typical of this injury, correct?
Correct.
Now, you're there. Did you then recommend something to him in terms of making a definitive determination of whether his nose is broken or whether there would be any problems regarding that?
My recommendation was that he see an ENT, which is an ears, nose, and throat specialist.
And what did he say regarding that?
He told me at the time that he was not going to go to be seen by the ENT.
Regarding the SI joint pain, did you give him some suggestions?
We discussed using the Lodine, which is the anti-inflammatory, to help with the inflammation, and then we discussed heat, ice, and massage.
You had seen him the 3 times we covered here, but you had seen him at other times that he complained on a prior occasion of having some back pain of some type. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay. And had you treated him for that before?
I had. It was related to constipation.
Okay. So it was not related to an injury itself, like a physical injury?
Correct.
Okay. I mean, I don't know, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I apologize. In terms of laceration to the head, you mentioned 2 of them. Mm-hmm. I got a bald head, so I know what it is to get cut or have the laceration. How do those bleed and distinguishing that from a cut somewhere else in the body? In terms of, is there something with the head, the fact that it bleeds more profusely, or doesn't it? Tell me about that.
The scalp is very vascular, meaning it has many blood vessels there. So a scalp laceration can bleed quite a significant amount more than perhaps somewhere else on the body, depending on the location.
And how about if the person doesn't have any hair?
It doesn't necessarily mean that it will bleed less, but maybe less noticeable because there would be maybe some hair blocking that area.
In other words, if you have hair, it would be either have more of an impact or cushion, or you just wouldn't notice if there was bleeding.
Possibly both. You may not notice the amount of blood because it could be getting mixed up with the hair itself. And I guess it would depend on the thickness of your hair to depend on the amount of cushion that would be.
I have no further questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. O'Mara?
Yes, thank you, if I might. No, but I will need a little assistance, my enthusiast. May I recruit you for a moment? And pictures that are on. Thank you very much, Ron. Actually, it will be a few minutes before I need this, so yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi.
I'm going to focus, again, he was a patient of yours for a while before the event where he came to you on February 27th, correct?
Correct.
But just to start with the last question first, he did not have any back pain caused by back injury before this event, correct?
No.
The back injury was actually internal concern that showed itself as a back pain. Right?
Correct. We believed it was likely related to the constipation when he complained
Right.
about that in the past.
So that when he came to you on the 27th, that was the first time he had ever complained of back pain.
Yes, this was unrelated.
Okay, let's focus then on that night.
Okay.
The day, make sure I do this right, so give me a moment. This Oh, yes, thank you very much, Your Honor, I apologize. Is this close to how he presented to you that day?
From what I recall, similar?
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, this was, just to orient you, this was taken the night before.
Okay.
Maybe 12 hours or so before you saw him.
Okay.
And was that pretty similar to the way he presented to you?
Fairly similar.
Okay.
It's a different picture when you're seeing it on a picture rather than up close, but
Certainly, certainly,
Yes.
and I apologize for that, but, sorry, I'm going to bounce back and forth a little bit. Now, approach the witness with the exhibits already in evidence. You probably have not seen this picture before, have you?
I have not.
If this person presented himself, you know that to be George Zimmerman?
Yes.
Okay, if this person had presented himself to you, looking like this, what would you have done for him?
If he had come to our office looking like that, we would have cleaned the wounds so we could better evaluate what the type of injuries that are, and then go about the same process that we went through, and then order the testing based off of that.
Okay, and if you look at this photograph as compared to the one we just identified, I would
Yes.
like to focus your attention to the nose area.
Okay.
Would you,
Object as to relevance, and also, she didn't see him like that, so I object as to speculation at this point.
my response, John?
Let me hear the rest of the question.
Would you agree that the swelling that you saw in that picture has gone down from the way it is here?
It looks like that it's decreased slightly.
Is that normal? Let's say that there's a 12-hour, let's say that there's a 4-hour difference, 5-hour difference between this picture and that picture. Is that a normal sort of receding of swelling?
It depends on what he's using to help keep the swelling down. So maybe if he was using anti-inflammatories or icing the area, then potentially yes, the swelling could be less.
Would we expect an injury of this significance to look like that 5 hours later? Is that normal,
Yes, it could.
once it's cleaned up?
Correct.
But would you agree that in this picture, that the nose is in fact more swollen than it is in that picture?
It does appear to be, yes.
And why is that? What happens to the body that it heals itself like that?
The body naturally tries to take care of itself if it can, and the body responds to trauma in a certain way, and that is why the body produces swelling. And then as the body is recovering, that's how the swelling resolves. Again, it also depends on the certain extraneous things that you're using, like anti-inflammatories or ice to the area.
So while this may look as though it is now a bone protrusion to the right side of the nose, it's not actually a bone protruding out there, is it?
It's unlikely in the sense that it's resolved and looks like that picture later.
Yet the body swells up at point of injury, does it not?
It does, it can,
And
yes.
it does that in response to the trauma of the hit, correct?
It can, yes.
And it does that by swelling. And the swelling, if you would, just sort of tell us what the body, why the body swells or how the body swells up in the area of trauma.
The body itself is reacting to the impact of something that's happened. So certain blood can rush to the area, or more fluid underneath the skin can rush to that area, and that's what produces the effect of the swelling.
Including lymph fluid, doesn't that sort of wander over, and white blood cells?
They can, potentially. That's the purpose of the lymph system, to help with infections or foreign bodies, things like that.
Particularly when we know that there's bleeding happening, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Bleeding, you would agree, sort of indicates broken blood vessels?
It can, yes. Blood
And would
vessels
you-
or capillaries.
And would you agree that there was bleeding inside the, is it nares or just the nose?
Likely there was bleeding inside the nares if you see it coming down the front of the face.
Okay.
Yes.
Where does that blood go if you're just standing up like I am and my nose is bleeding?
Normally gravity will pull it down.
How about if I'm laying on my back? Where is the blood going to go?
What will happen is you can swallow some of that back down your throat.
Actually, it can go into the sinuses as well, can't it?
It can.
And as it goes back down the sinuses, it goes into the back of your throat?
It can.
And you
Correct.
actually can be swallowing your own blood, correct?
You can. That what may give you the taste in your mouth. Correct.
The swelling that we've just spoken about is the body's initial reaction to trauma, correct?
It is.
And it only can last maybe just a few hours, correct?
It depends on the level of the trauma and the patient, but yes.
Does that diminish the fact that the body was in fact traumatized, as we see in this picture?
Meaning, does it make it any less plausible that the body
Sure.
was attacked?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. It's a natural reaction for the body to begin its healing process immediately, correct?
Correct.
And of course, this space was cleaned up after the blood was all removed, and can you see, well, you can barely still see the cut just at the top of the bridge and nose there, correct?
Correct.
Would you acknowledge that there was in fact a larger laceration or cut on the nose here?
There appears to be, but it appears to have blood surrounding the area as well.
Okay. Again, once you clean it up, it looks a little bit better.
Correct.
Have you seen this picture before?
I have not.
Okay. Would the scalp bleed in a fashion like this from those two lacerations?
It can. The scalp, again, is very vascular, meaning there are plenty of blood vessels on the scalp surface that could cause bleeding like that.
Or bleed down the back that way?
Again, gravity would start to pull that down.
Okay. Let's spend a moment, Your Honor, the lights, if you would. I want to show you some other pictures of Mr. Zimmerman that night. Now, can you see that photograph?
I can.
Okay. Do you note additional areas of swelling on this picture that you may not have noticed on your physical evaluation? I'm sorry, Your Honor, that is State's Exhibit 57. Let me point you, do you see anything in this area of swelling?
There is swelling there that I can see.
Okay.
Yes.
Would that also possibly have resolved itself in the 12 hours between this picture and when you saw him?
It could have, yes.
Okay. Do you see an area up here that seems to be misshapen?
In the photograph, yes, I see that.
Okay. Would that also be an area of swelling?
It's normally an area of swelling. We call those scalp hematomas, where blood can pool under the skin.
Tell me how that occurs. How does a scalp hematoma occur?
A hematoma can occur through trauma, so some sort of trauma to the head that resulted in the collection of blood there, or fluid there.
So in effect, in sort of layman's terms, if I was to smash my head against something, let's say I hit this part, the trauma would cause blood or maybe lymph system fluid to flood that area.
Yes.
Similar to the nose, it would go there, do its job, and then sort of recede.
Correct.
And that's what causes swelling, as we know it?
Correct.
And that's what caused it here? Maybe?
It could, yes.
And that's what caused it up here?
It could, yes.
You see these, right?
Yes,
And those the lacerations that you identified?
those were the two, correct.
Okay. What is the potential outcome from head trauma like that?
It, again, depends on the physical exam of the patient, and you base a lot of that off the physical exam of the patient. But any sort of head trauma can result in an internal injury, meaning bleeding into the brain, skull fractures.
And an internal hematoma, is that dural hematoma?
It depends on where the blood is actually. You can have an epidural or subdural hematoma.
Okay. That may or may not have external notice, correct? You can have an internal hematoma, subdural hematoma, epidural hematoma, bleeding on beneath the scalp that will resolve itself, correct?
An epidural or subdural hematoma would be below the skull.
Right.
That's the difference between a hematoma, which is above the skull, between the skin.
Right. Hematoma outside of skull
Correct.
resolves itself sort of between the skull and the skin.
Correct.
And then subdural or epidural is you actually have gone below the skull and you're just in that dura, which is what cushions the brain.
Correct.
And you could have injuries like this could certainly cause a epidural or a subdural hematoma, correct?
Not necessarily the lacerations themselves, but if there was head trauma, completely.
I'm sorry. So if I just went up to this head and cut it with a razor blade or a scalpel, that would not, you would imagine, cause a subdural or epidural hematoma.
No.
But if I took that same skull and let's say smashed it on concrete, sufficient enough to cause that injury. So smash might be a term of art, but getting that injury by having your head hit against cement, could that cause a subdural, epidural hematoma?
That could, depending on how hard the impact was.
And that would, in fact, be an injury below the skull in the area where the brain is.
Correct.
Which is one of the reasons why you do what you do in your evaluation to make sure that he can still focus his eyes and still speak, because you're concerned at that point with any head trauma that there may be some brain injury.
Correct.
And your charge then at that point is to rule out that possibility, though you would agree that possibility exists whenever you have an injury like this.
It can, yes.
Close up of the same thing, you still see the swelling again up on this area and right in here.
Correct.
Tell me, can you see that injury up there or that occurrence up there?
I can see what maybe appears to be an abrasion of the scalp.
Is that, what would you call that? Is that punctate a bruising or?
It can be, or it depends on what the surface was that maybe caused the injury, and it could be an abrasion, which is basically just a thin layer of the skin coming off.
What are punctate injuries? Just explain that.
Punctate injuries would be injuries to the blood vessels themselves causing punctate bleeding or small sort of capillary bursts like that.
Would that occur if you had your head hit against something as irregular but flat as concrete?
It could.
Is that a way to occur to get those little mini bruisings all over the place?
If it was hit on concrete or anything like that, the rough surface of that could have caused that too.
Okay. Consistent with it being hit on concrete, isn't it?
It can be consistent with that, whether or not that is what it was struck on. I'm sure that can happen on multiple other surfaces as well, but it could be consistent.
Okay. If Mr. Zimmerman were to come to you and say he had that injury and that it occurred because his head was hit on concrete, would it be consistent?
Objection is a speculation, no?
Yes.
I think she's already testified.
Okay, I'll move on then. Your Honor. Did you notice any injury right there?
I don't recall that injury.
Can you tell us what that looks like to you?
It looks like it maybe be a scratch of the skin or an abrasion of the skin as well.
Okay. And now let's look up here at that injury there. What is that? Can you identify what that is?
It looks like there may be some mild swelling there.
Another bruise?
It's
And
hard to tell if there's an actual bruise or discoloration of the skin, but it does appear there's some swelling.
Oh, I'm sorry, but would we just characterize that in layman's terms, that's a bump on the head?
Correct.
Well, how would that come, how would you get something like that?
Again, it can come from hitting your head on any sort of surface potentially, or being struck by something.
Okay. Can you also see the same type of punctate injury right around here?
I can see that.
As far up as here? You see that?
It appears to be.
And as down low as here?
Correct.
As what you testified before, sort of the same?
It appears to be, yes.
And I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'm not identifying the exhibits. That's number 66 that the witness is testifying concerning. And do you see this area right there of swelling? From this ridge here down to this ridge. Can you see that?
It's hard to tell in this picture from a side view.
Okay. Can you see this injury here? And can you identify what that is?
Objection as to leading from this aspect, in terms of testifying, Mr. O'Mara testifying there's injuries there without this witness saying that there is.
Okay, sustained as to the word injury.
Okay,
Rephrase your question.
I will. Can you see anything in this area that I'm circling?
There appears to be an abrasion there.
And again, an abrasion consistent with that head being hit on concrete?
It can be consistent with that, yes.
And that was 68, Your Honor, if I didn't identify it. Now looking at State's Exhibit 69, let me ask you to pay attention to this area right here. Is that the abrasion that you were identifying earlier?
It appears to be the same.
And just to the, going back, can you see that as an area of swelling as well?
It does appear to be swelling. Unfortunately, some of that you have to take into account on a physical exam of how that area feels during the time. So it's difficult to get in a picture. You have certain head shapes as well.
Okay. And again, with this may well have resolved itself in the 12 hours or so between when the picture was taken and when you saw him, correct?
It could potentially have, yes.
And do you see similar, what do you see up in this area on the, what would be above his left eye?
It's
Can you see that?
slightly shaded, but possibly another abrasion up there as well.
And can we see then the lacerations in the area around the lacerations on this side?
I can see those, yes.
Can you see, is that the area that we talked about before with the misshapen skull
It appears to
at
be.
the top? Now let's look at this side to orient it. This is State's Exhibit 70 and his right side of his skull, correct?
Okay.
What do you see, what is here?
Again, it looks like it could be some swelling with the abrasions that we noted before.
And how about this area up here, additional?
Additional abrasions.
Would that abrasion itself come from its own strike upon something?
That would be hard to determine.
And how about the one up here?
Again, it would be difficult to determine if it was from its own strike.
And the one over here?
Same thing.
Do we get now a better view of the misshapen area on the back of his skull from this perspective?
There appears to be possible swelling there or the misshape of his skull itself.
I think we've testified to, and this is State's Exhibit 71, you've testified to these areas and also this bruising up here, correct?
Correct.
If I might, Exhibit 74, this is a close-up of the area of the lacerations. Can you better describe for me what you see here as far as additional areas of swelling around the lacerations?
There appears to be swelling around the lacerations, which would be consistent with a trauma that elicited the laceration itself.
Meaning that whatever caused the laceration was also at the same time the sort of compression injury that we talked about earlier, where you're...
And that could cause the swelling, correct.
Okay. Consistent, all of it, with being hit on concrete, is it not?
It could be consistent, yes.
If the complaint was that that head was hit on concrete, would you consider that consistent with the injuries that you see?
I would.
Thank you very much, Your Honor, for the lights. Thank you. Now let's spend just a minute on the report itself. Mr. De La Rionda had already gone over it, so I'm just going to hit some high points on it, if I might. His vital signs, blood pressure 130/80.
Correct.
A concern for a 28-year-old?
Slightly high on the systolic side, but from what I remember in the past, he's never had a problem with high blood pressure before.
But not a good high blood pressure, right? You'd like to see it lower?
Ideally, we like to see it 120/80 or less, but I wouldn't be a cause of concern at 130.
Pulse at 109,
That is high. Ideally, we see this around 70 to 80.
evidencing what to you?
That an increased pulse rate can be related to stress or to trauma. It can also be related to multiple other things, something to do with your heart, causing some sort of cardiac condition.
Nonetheless, again, not in top shape, huh?
It's not where we would like it to be.
And how about the BMI?
The BMI is 31.48. And
Meaning
again,
that he is clinically obese.
correct, based on BMI classification.
And again, not healthy.
Ideally, that's not the healthy range, normally between 19 to 25 or 26.
Not athletic.
It doesn't necessarily mean someone's not athletic with a BMI of 31. It just means it's not at the ideal range of what the standards of health for BMI would be.
Okay. And you've gone through the actual injuries that you identified. We talked for a moment about the SI injury.
Correct.
Is that injury consistent with falling on your back, or I guess in the buttocks area, did you say?
It can be, yes.
Okay. When you get that type of SI pain, SI is
Sacroiliac?
Sacroiliac,
Correct.
and that's basically at the base of your spine.
It's not necessarily right at the base of your spine. Your spine comes down in a straight. It would be where each side of the buttocks are. It would be directly in the center of that. So you have one on each side.
And how does a injury like that occur?
An SI joint injury can occur through trauma or through a fall. Sometimes people have SI joint from an improper stretching technique or through some sort of athletic type of performance.
He had reported to you that he was hit in the nose, correct?
Correct.
By his attacker.
Correct.
Was that consistent with the picture I showed you here of his nose or nasal injuries? Is that consistent with getting punched in the nose?
That would be consistent.
And is the SI injury that he talked to you about consistent with being thrown on the ground on your back?
It would be consistent.
The only way to really identify whether or not a nose is, quote, broken is with an x-ray, correct?
That will be the definitive way to decide if there was a nasal fracture.
It would be a bit easier for you to be conclusive in the determination of broken nose if you actually saw a complete septal deviation, right?
Clinically, if there was more of a septal deviation, then there could possibly be a more definitive answer to that.
So if the whole nose was literally pointed off in one direction or the other, pretty obvious that there's a break, correct?
Correct.
But short of that, then you would need to have an x-ray in order to get that accomplished.
Correct.
And that was the reason why you had referred him to an ENT,
Correct.
to document what you could not document in your office.
Correct.
You don't do nose or nasal or face head x-rays in the office, correct?
We do not. It's not in our scope of practice.
And did he tell you that he wasn't going to go to the ENT because of the high deductible on his insurance policy?
I don't recall there being a discussion over cost or deductible.
Do you remember him talking to you about what it would cost for that type of evaluation?
I don't recall that.
Okay. Is that something that you would have noted or just a conversation with him?
He may have had that in a conversation that I don't recall. It also wouldn't change my opinion of where to send him or to not send him.
And you were firm in your opinion of a couple of things. One, that he needed to see an ENT for the
Correct.
nose injury.
Correct.
Even though it was reduced to the better than the cleaned up picture we looked at, right?
Correct.
Because that went from this picture to that picture in 4 hours, and you had another 12 hours of the swelling to go down.
Correct.
But even still, you wanted an ENT consult.
Yes, because there can be residual effects of a nasal fracture if it's not taken care of.
And you also suggested, based upon the conversation that you had with him, that he should get a psychological consult, correct?
Correct.
Why is that?
He was already seeing a psychologist, and in my professional opinion, if someone is to go through the sort of ordeal that he went through the night before of what he's telling me, then I would recommend that anybody go see a psychologist.
Did he come across to you as though he was trying to make certain that you would document his injuries consistent with being attacked?
I don't recall that.
Okay. Was he just reporting the symptoms as they seem to exist?
Yes.
He wasn't, from your perspective, he wasn't trying to use you as some shill to come up with an excuse or a reason or a medical reason for his injuries, was he?
It did not appear that way.
Okay. Was, in fact, all of his complaints documented by your evaluation?
They were.
And those injuries actually did exist, correct?
They did.
And in addition, the psychological concern that you had, in your professional opinion, that existed as well, didn't it?
It did, and that would have existed for anybody who came in with what he was concerned about or what had taken place that night.
Particularly as documented or supported by the injuries that he showed or exhibited to you.
Supported by that.
What we didn't note in the cleaned up picture, you know the one I'm talking about when I say that?
Yes.
We didn't note any black eyes on that picture, did you?
I didn't notice them from the picture, no.
So tell me, as the body begins to heal itself, we know that it rushes to the area of trauma, as you said, right?
Correct.
And then it sort of recedes.
Correct.
Well, what's the timeline on those eyes to go black?
Sometimes the black eyes can become more apparent at a later date. That's not necessarily an initial event that happens. Most of the time swelling comes to the area, then the swelling may recede, and then something like the black eyes can occur after that.
Because the black eyes are actually residual blood that has escaped the capillaries and just sort of pools in the soft pockets of the under the eyes, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So you don't expect to see a black eye a moment or 10 minutes or an hour even after a punch in the nose, do you?
Not necessarily that quickly.
But is it consistent that if he had gotten punched in the nose, let's say 7/16 the night before, that when you saw him 11 a.m. in the morning, that his eyes would be blackened?
They could be, yeah. It was consistent with what I saw in my physical exam.
And they were, in fact, two black eyes, correct?
They were.
I mentioned a moment ago, was he trying to sort of somehow make up or document significant injuries? And I think you said he wasn't.
Not from the impression that I had.
On the other side, was he trying to even minimize his injuries and get it behind him? Did you get any of that feel with him telling you he wasn't going to an ENT and he just wanted a note to get back to work?
I don't recall that per se, him having that certain effect.
Okay. And Mr. De Leon asked you about the bandage. Obviously, you were taking that off. Did that seem to be an appropriate bandaging to do for that injury?
That was fine, given that the skin edges were well approximated and the scalp lacerations were not that deep. I didn't feel like if you're referring to something like a butterfly bandage or a butterfly stitch was necessary at the time.
Right. It wasn't, you didn't look at that bandage like when we're kids or something and just have a little cut and a 4-inch by 4-inch bandage. You didn't look at that and wonder why would someone put a bandage that size on two injuries of that size, did you?
No.
Did it seem appropriate that it be bandaged?
Yeah, it was appropriate to keep the lacerations covered.
And particularly, let's say if it was a nursing student who was looking at that injury, would it make sense as a nursing student to cover an open wound?
Yes.
It's a speculation.
I'll rephrase it.
Thank you.
If you saw those wounds on the back of the head, you know the ones we're talking about, right? If you saw those wounds, would you clean them off and put bandages over them?
I would likely have them cleaned, and if the patient desired, I would put a bandage over them. It doesn't necessarily have to be bandaged, but there would be no problem with doing that to keep certain debris out of the area.
Right. And we talked a bit about what happens when you fall down, and Mr. Deliano used himself as a model, and I might use myself as a model, that I may not get as injured because I have hair than someone who doesn't have hair? Is that...
I don't know if that would necessarily be true. I guess it would depend on the thickness of your hair.
Okay.
But I don't think that you would be any less injured based off having hair or not having hair.
Okay. It would be more apparent with somebody who back then didn't have hair to cover the injuries, but the injuries are what they are, correct?
They are what they are, yes.
And certainly, whoever may have inflicted those injuries knew how much hair was on the body that they were inflicting the injuries upon, correct?
That's just speculation.
Did you ask Mr. Zimmerman if he had cut his hair in the past 14 hours?
I had not asked that question.
I'm going to have a moment, Your Honor. Thank you very much for your time, Your Honor. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any redirect?
You mentioned something that I was curious about. We're talking about the shape of the head.
Yes,
I guess we all think the head is perfectly shaped, our skull. Is that always true?
it's not necessarily always
Tell me a
true.
little bit about that if you could.
Everybody's head shape is completely different. Obviously, most people you don't notice because they have hair on their head, so it depends on what that may look like. But everybody can have certain abnormalities of the skull.
So in other words, people may have a bump there just pre-existing and it may not be caused by trauma.
It could be, correct.
All right. So you had an opportunity, you were showing a lot of photographs. Can you pull those up again? Sorry.
It's still up.
Oh, it is? Okay, just go back. Okay. You were showing a lot of photographs. I'm going to go through them real quickly. You're not saying that those were all stuff that occurred the day before or the night before, all that, are you?
It would be hard to determine that based off just a photo. Most of that will be based off physical exam as well.
Thank you. I think I'm through with the photographs, Your Honor. And my point is, you actually saw him as a live person. In other words, you actually looked at his head.
Correct.
Right? You looked at his head, and he had less hair than Mr. Guy here, but you looked, I'm assuming you didn't just kind of glance. You actually looked at his head.
Correct.
Right? To examine.
Correct.
And all you saw in your examination was 2 lacerations, correct?
That was all I noted.
I'm saying you didn't see it, you didn't document any other stuff that we've been talking about, all this trauma. You didn't notice that at all.
At the time, that wasn't documented. I don't recall if there was some swelling that I didn't possibly put in my note.
Okay. At this time, do you recall, or at that time, did you notate any other swelling other than the lacerations?
Those were the only 2 things that I noted.
Okay. So, and by the way, you mentioned if it could, let's speculate and say that those were all trauma-caused hematomas or whatever. Those were apparently cleaned up by the time they saw you, right? By the time he saw you the next day?
The swelling was minimized, yes.
Okay. So what that took away basically was what? Maybe an aspirin or 2 or Tylenol or 2 or what? Or it just did naturally?
Depends. The body will help to react naturally, and then also depends on what sort of, again, exogenous things you may be using.
So you're not saying that that is severe trauma in any way?
I don't know if I would say it's not severe or not. I mean, he does have 2 scalp lacerations, and I'm basing that off what his complaints are when he comes in.
His
So-
history, in other words.
Exactly.
But you only notated 2 lacerations in the whole thing.
Those are the only things that I documented, yes.
And I apologize, you notated also his nose, but I'm talking about the back of his head, all his skull. You only noticed 2 actually lacerations.
Those were the things I was looking for the most because those were the things that we discussed personally.
Okay. And when you did the whole exam in terms of nausea, or I'm sorry, about dizziness, being able to be, whether he's conscious or not, you ruled all of those out. No trauma to the head, correct?
I'm ruling those out based on what he's telling me, and then I base that off my physical exam, depending on his neurological exam to make sure all of that seems appropriate.
And so you ruled all that out?
It seemed like he was neurologically intact, yes.
Okay. So he didn't have any brain injury is what I'm going to.
There doesn't mean that you can't have a brain injury, meaning a concussion from a trauma, but it did not appear to be anything that would require imaging because he wasn't complaining of those specific symptoms.
And you also did not notice any, correct? You didn't? I
Sorry,
thought-
can you rephrase the
No.
question?
He gave you a history in terms of he wasn't complaining of trauma to his head, correct?
Exactly. He did complain of trauma to his head, meaning he had the lacerations.
I apologize.
Yeah.
Other than that,
And again, the story that he told me of his head being struck against the ground. So he did complain of head trauma, but from what I'm looking at based on my physical exam and doing his neurological testing, everything appeared to be intact. And because of that, I didn't order the additional testing.
because if you had noted something, you would have ordered additional testing.
At the time, exactly. I also mentioned that what are the signs to look for should something like that occur? And if that were to occur, then additional testing would be ordered.
And you never required any, is that correct?
I was never notified of anything as a change.
Okay. So did any of the injuries require anything for treatment other than minor cleaning, et cetera?
For the most part, they required cleaning to the area. And then again, we don't know the definitive diagnosis of the nasal fracture, which may have required additional treatment, but that was not completed.
And you recommended that he go to an ENT, and he told you he wasn't going?
At the time, from what I recall, yes, he was not going to go.
And Mr. O'Mara asked you about that he said, or possibly said, that he didn't have insurance. You don't recall that, him ever saying that, do you?
I don't recall that discussion.
And I think you notated already, but you did note in your records as to, I'm sorry, February 27th, that he came in because he needed a note for work, is that correct?
Correct.
He didn't come into your office and say, God, I've got all these head injuries, I can't think, I can't walk, I can't function. He didn't come in complaining about that, did he?
The major concern that was taken by the medical assistant was that he needed, of what happened, and then that he needed the return for work, yes.
You mentioned also that in terms of psychological, that you suggested, but that he was also already seeing a psychologist, is that correct?
He was already established with a psychologist, yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, Your Honor, may I have a moment? Going back to August 19th, 2011, I don't know if I removed that document. That was the first time you would have had contact with him.
Correct.
Mr. Zimmerman talked about his exercise routine, that he was taking mixed martial arts classes, right?
Correct.
Object, Your Honor, that would be outside the scope of cross-examination, and this is redirect.
Sustained.
Your Honor, I'll be glad to approach the bench regarding something that I want to show her.
Well, that wasn't brought up in cross-examination, so it's outside the scope.
Yes, Your Honor, but may we approach the bench
Yes,
on
you
another
may.
matter? Ms. Polgate, when Mr. Zimmerman talked about in terms of the exercise routine, in terms of MMA, et cetera, he talked about doing it 3 days a week and 3 hours a day, is that correct?
Correct.
And finally, ma'am, what kind of symptoms would you expect from a gunshot wound to the heart? What kind of symptoms would that
Object,
cause?
Your Honor, that would be outside, actually outside his direct and outside my cause.
Sustained.
Thank you, I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Just a
Any
couple, because what we're going, might just see the last page that you referenced to her. I have mine, but yours is. I'm sorry. Actually, what Mrs. Zimmerman said to you, not that he had done MMA 3 times a week, or what he said was aerobics, right?
That is what is written on the sheet, correct?
Okay.
But then I go ahead and go in more detail with the patient when they're back in the office.
But when he talked about doing this type, we're talking about aerobic exercise, are we not?
When I would ask him what type of aerobic exercise, then mixed martial arts would have been mentioned.
And medically speaking, would you agree that whatever he did to stop the attack allowed him to survive it?
It could have potentially, yeah, it depends on the amount of trauma he was sustaining at the time.
So stopping the attack is what allowed him to survive it. Would you agree?
It could have, yes.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further.
Any redirect?
Would you agree that's pure speculation on your part?
I wasn't there at the time of the event, so I don't know the exact trauma that took
Okay,
place.
thank you very much.
Okay, may Ms. Folgate be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, you are excused. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to recess for the evening and for the weekend. So while we're in recess until Monday morning at 9 a.m., I want to advise you again that you're not to discuss the case amongst yourselves nor with anybody else. You're not to read or listen to any radio, television, or newspaper reports about the case. You're not to use any type of an electronic device to get on the internet to do independent research about the case, people, places, things, or terminology. And finally, you're not to read or create any emails, text messages, Twitters, tweets, blogs, or social networking pages about the case. Do I have your assurance that you will abide by these instructions? Okay, with that, have a great weekend. Put your notepads face down and follow Deputy Jarvis. Please be seated. Is there anything that we need to take up before we recess till Monday morning at 9 a.m.?
No, Your Honor,
No, for Lisa, those exhibits that were numbers, Mr. De La Ronda? No, I needed to make sure that exhibits 194, 195, and 197 will be handed to the clerk Monday morning. Excuse me. 194, 195, and 197 will be handed to the clerk Monday morning.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
194, 195. The court said 194, 195, and 196.
Oh, not 196, yeah.
I think we withdrew 197, I think. No? No? Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else the court needs to take up before we recess till Monday morning at 9 a.m.?
No, the only very minor point is we're getting a lot of progress done on the statements. If we hit a loggerhead, we might need court intervention for a couple of minutes. We could probably delay that until just Monday morning at 9 o'clock. We'll give the alternatives and come back to you at 9, but that's the only thing.
Well, do you want to say that we'll come back at 8:30 Monday morning, and then if you don't need court rulings on it, you'll have an extra half hour to set up, or if you...
Fabulous idea.
Yes, Your
Okay.
Honor.
The jury's coming back at 9 a.m. We'll be back at 8:30 in case you need court rulings. With that, court is in recess. Thank you.